guy and a great writer. I don't know if anybody is ever dressed up in a fox suit before. Can anyone raise their hand if they've ever done that? Your next reader has dressed up in a fox suit. His name is Lev Grossman. He's written The Magicians, The Magician King. And this summer, the trilogy will conclude with The Magician's Land on August 5th. So Lev also writes book reviews for Time magazine, which you once told me on writing book reviews that you'd be unemployable otherwise if you hadn't got a job writing book reviews. Is that still true?
It's still true, Ron. Nothing's changed.
Lev helped kick off the first reading series at Singularity Co. about a year and a half ago, and he's been really, really kind to come back and share more about some genre fiction that shaped him and that he loved. A big round of applause for Lev Grossman.
Thanks, Ryan. I've come here tonight to talk about Larry Niven. Bad business out of the way. Right up front, leave if you have to. But that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm sometimes asked in interviews about my influences, and I crap on for about 25 minutes about J.K. Rowling and C.S. Lewis, Susanna Clarke, and Yves Lenoir. And then at the very end I say, oh, but you know, the guy who really taught me how to write the kind of writing I do in The Magicians is Larry Niven, and the specific story cycle called The Warlock Stories. But by that point, the interviewer's attention has invariably wandered away, so I never get to do my big set piece about Larry Niven, so I'm going to do it now. Because they are, in fact, the place from which I nicked almost everything that I published in the Magicians trilogy. I don't know if we have any pre-existing, all of you will be Larry Niven fans in about 15 minutes, but are there any pre-existing Larry Niven fans in the audience? Yeah. Okay. Larry Niven he's an old school writer. He was born in 1938. If you were as hugely old as I am, then you would have grown up in the 1970s reading science fiction. And let me tell you something, in the 1970s, in the world of science fiction, Larry Niven was the shit. He was what was happening. He was probably the premier example of what, this is a very argued about term, but what I think of as hard SF, which was, again, from my peculiar point of view, this was science fiction that was, among other things, grounded in and constrained by the laws of physics. It was based in hard science, and it attempted to work within those constraints. And as such, it seemed to me massively more rigorous and cool than any of that golden age crap, which was all made up. Larry Niven was just incredibly important to me, and his masterpiece is a novel called Green World, which I really commend all of you. I'm sure there are multiple copies in the same room with us. I've scoped out the Niven section, it's over there. You know, pillage it later on. But he also wrote fantasy. He wrote a few short stories, which are called the Warlock Stories. And they are magnificent. They are somewhat writing high fantasy, but approaching it from the point of view of a hard SF writer. Niven was interested in science, he was interested in how things work, he had a degree in mathematics, and he was interested in how magic worked. He wanted to figure that shit out. No mystical stuff, no Vaseline on the lens. He wanted to figure out what exactly happened when you cast a spell, and he did. And he wrote about it, and it was truly fantastic. These stories are really funny and dramatic and sad. The first one of them is called Not Long Before the End, and I'll read you the opening. It starts like this. A swordsman battled a sorcerer once upon a time. In that age, such battles were frequent. A natural antipathy exists between swordsmen and sorcerers, as between cats and small birds, between rats and men. Usually, the swordsman lost. and humanity's average intelligence rose some trifling fraction. Sometimes the swordsman won, and again the species was improved, for a sorcerer who cannot kill one miserable swordsman is a poor excuse for a sorcerer. Which, I mean, what the fuck, right? Why ever write anything else? It's definitive, the category is retired. You can't begin a fantasy short story better than that. But it goes on. This battle differed from the others. On one side, the sword itself was enchanted. On the other, the sorcerer knew a great and terrible trick. So we'll skip ahead. This is a story summarized about a magic user called the Warlock. We're in about 12,000 BC. The Warlock is a really fucking elite sorcerer. He's about 200 years old, but he only looks like he's 20 because his magic is that awesome. And the Warlock has noticed a strange thing, which is that when he practices magic in a particular place for too long, his magic begins to lose its power. And it weakens and it weakens, and eventually he just has to move and go to some totally other place and set up shop again and then keep practicing magic, and then he becomes powerful again. And he's been thinking about this fact for a long time. And he also has a girlfriend who actually is 20. The awesomeness of magic. Doesn't matter. So, there's him, and then there's this enchanted sword, and then there's the swordsman. The name of the sword was Larry. It was several hundred years old and quite famous. As for the swordsman, his name is no secret. He was Bellhap, Saddlestone, Wordless, Ag Miraquote, Rutanenson. His friends, who tended to be temporary, called him Hap. He was a barbarian, of course. A civilized man would have had more sense than to touch Larry. Better morals, boom! Very different. And better morals than to stab a sleeping woman, which was how Hap acquired his sword. Or vice versa. So, Hap shows up at the Warlock's place, which is like a cave or whatever, and the Warlock comes out and they confront each other. The Warlock says, "Do you know what you carry?" Hap nodded ominously. "Then you ought to know better. Maybe it's not too late. See if you can transfer it to your left hand." I tried that. I can't let go of it. Hap cut at the air restlessly with his 60 pounds of sword. "I have to sleep with the damn thing clutched in my hand." "Well, it's too late then." "It's worth it," Hap said grimly. "But now I can kill you." Hap, for some reason, is really pissed at the Warlock because he hasn't stabbed this hot girlfriend. "Too long has an innocent woman been subjected to your lecherous—" I know. The Warlock changed languages suddenly, speaking high and fast. He spoke thus for almost a minute. "Do you feel any pain?" "Not a twinge," said Hap. He hadn't moved. He stood with his remarkable sword at the ready, glowering at the magician across the street. "No sudden urge to travel, attacks of remorse, change of body temperature." But Hap was grinning now, and not at all nicely. I thought not. Well, it had to be tried, and there was an instant of blinding light. When it reached the vicinity of the hill, the meteorite had dwindled to the size of a baseball. It should have finished its journey at the back of Hap's head. Instead, it exploded a millisecond too soon. When the light had died, Hap stood within a ring of craterlets. Again, no one had written fantasy like this before. Larry Niven was the first person who actually had a really fucking sensible think about what magic would be good for, which would be to direct a meteorite into the rear of the skull of the person with the sword. Never figured that out before. He had a lot of practical ideas about magic. But Larry makes you involved in this art. The swordsman's unsymmetrical jaw dropped, and then he closed his mouth and started forward. The sword hummed faintly. Warlock turned his back. Hap curled his lip at the Warlock's cowardice, and then he jumped 3 feet backward from a standing start. A shadow had pulled itself from the Warlock's back. In a lunar cave with the sun glaring into its mouth, a man's shadow on the wall might have looked that sharp and black. The shadow dropped to the ground and stood up, a humanoid outline that was less a shape than a window view of the ultimate blackness beyond the death of the universe. And then it leapt. The Larry seemed to move of its own accord. It hacked the demon once lengthwise and once across, while the demon seemed to batter against an invisible shield, trying to reach Hap even as it died. if you've read The Magicians, you'll realize that I stole that completely. For no reason. I actually told Niven this. I've met it twice. Once was at 1 in the morning at an absinthe bar at a Worldcon in Toronto.
Keep talking.
It's not a good memory. Clever, Hap-handed, a pentagram on your back with a demon trapped inside. That's clever, said the warlock, but it didn't work. Carrying Larendry works, but it's not clever. Now, the warlock does something weird, which is that he takes a metal disc, a copper disc, and he places it in midair, and he causes it to spin magically. And it spins more and more rapidly. He's placed a spell on it that makes it accelerate, go faster and faster, with no upper limit, so soon it becomes sort of hypersonic, and that's happening in the background while the rest of this sort of goes on. And the warlock is lecturing Hap about the sword he's carrying, which isn't a sword at all. It's just a demon that happens to look like a sword. If you had any ounce of sense, you'd cut your arm off at the elbow. Hap looked startled. You mean there's a demon imprisoned in the metal? Get it through your head. There is no metal. It's a demon, a bound demon, and it's a parasite. It'll age you to death in a year unless you cut it loose. Well, what's happening is this disc that's spinning. As it goes faster and faster, it uses up more and more magical power, which in this universe is called mana for some reason. Anyway, it's called mana, and it's using up all the mana in the region. And what the warlock is thinking is if he could use up all the magic in the region, maybe this demon, Larendry, will die because it's a magical creature. So Hap raised his sword, and his sword changed. It was a massive red demon, horned and hooved, and its teeth were in Hap's right hand. It paused deliberately for the few seconds it took Hap to realize what had happened and to try to jerk away, and then it bit down, and the swordsman's hand was off the wrist. The demon reached out, slowly enough, but Hap, in his surprise, was unable to move. He felt the taloned fingers close his windpipe. He felt the strength leak out of the taloned hand, and he saw surprise and dismay spread across the demon's face. The copper disc exploded. All at once, and nothing first, it disintegrated into a flat cloud of metallic particles and was gone, flashing away as so much meteorite dust. The light was as lightning striking at one's feet, the sound was as thunder, the smell was vaporized copper. I'm just going to pause to say, the smell, when you read Tolkien about magic, or C.S. Lewis about magic, they never talk about smell. No one talks about how magic smells. But from that one sentence, I learned that magic must always have a smell. In order to feel properly real, you have to activate that extra sense, and I always do it when I write. And I learned it from that one sentence. The smell was vaporized copper. So, the warlock. This is what sucks, because magic has gone away. There's no more magic in this region, and all his youth spells have just completely died. So suddenly he becomes massively old and wrinkly and starts to die. So Hap clutched his messily severed wrist and he said, "But what happened?" "Mana," the warlock mumbled, and he spat out a complete set of blackened teeth. "Mana. What I discovered was that the power behind magic is a natural resource, like the fertility of the soil. You use it up, it's gone. But can you see why I kept it a secret? One day all the wide world's mana will be used up. No more mana, no more magic. Do you know that Atlantis is tectonically unstable? Succeeding generations of sorcerer kings renew the spells to keep the whole continent from sliding into the sea, but what happens when the spells don't work anymore? They couldn't possibly evacuate the whole continent in time. It's kind of not like now." Right, we're almost at the end. So again, long story short, the warlock happens to be, he was hiding a dagger up his sleeve, he stabs the swordsman dies. But the warlock is in bad shape too because he's super old. Fortunately, his girlfriend comes back. We've heard a lot about her. She's come back and she sort of picks up his weird, wrinkly, sort of half corpse and carries him down the hill to where there's still some magic flying around. And so his youth spells start kicking back in, and then he becomes young again. But you can tell that she's kind of grossed out that she's seen his true form. And it's kind of in the air that she's going to dump him. It's sort of a bummer. And then just as it has a perfect beginning, this story has a perfect end. And I want to pause to try to express to you how profound and important this was to me when I read it when I was 15. And if you were to imagine me reading this as a 15-year-old, I was a nerd. I had social anxiety. I was super shy. I was short and skinny, and yet I had like totally no self-esteem at all. But I at the same time had this weird arrogance. I was totally convinced that I was smarter than everybody else and I should be running everything. And I can't quite figure out why I'm not. Obviously there was something missing that ought to have been there. When I read this story, I figured it out. Magic. Obviously, beings such as myself evolved in an environment where magic was real, and then magic got used up, and here I am, and it ought to be here, and it's not, and now I know what happened to it. Now I know why the world is the way it is, and the reason why I am the way I am. I'm a magician in a world without magic. But I'll give Larry Niven the last word. The warlock, he's sort of getting his youth back, but also knowing he's being dumb. And he's thinking about magic. And he says, when the mana runs out, I'll go like a blown candle flame. And civilization will follow. No more magic. No more magic-based industries. And the whole world will be barbarians until men learn a new way to coerce nature. And the swordsmen, the damn stupid swordsmen, are going to win after all.